Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. As I said, this is a regular meeting of the Board of Trustees of the Village of Wilmette. We'll call the matters in the order in which they appear on the printed agenda. And there are copies of the agenda on the table by the door, so you may want to have one so you can follow along to see when your matter will be called. If you plan to address us tonight, we ask that you please come up to the podium, please speak into the microphone and tell us who you are and where you live, as that may be relevant to the matter at hand. We ask that you speak clearly into the microphone so that we can hear you, and because everything you say and everything we say is being recorded. And from those recordings, minutes of the meeting are prepared. These minutes are available in hard copy form at Village Hall, as well as on our website at wilmette.com. Now, our Village Board meetings are also televised on both Local Access Channel 6 and on the Internet. And if you look up, you can see the cameras in the corners of the room. Red light will indicate which one is active. By televising our meetings, we make it easy for our neighbors in the community to follow the proceedings of the Village Board, see the types of matters that come before us, the questions that we ask, and the policies we create. You can find archive videos of Village Board and other local government meetings at wilmette.com. And I would like to personally thank all the residents of Wilmette who regularly tune in to Channel 6 to follow the workings of their local government. Before each meeting, the board receives a packet of agenda materials, and these materials are also posted on wilmette.com on the Friday before our meeting so that residents and other interested parties can review the very same materials that the board members receive. This week's packet contained 301 pages. We've had an opportunity to review the information in the agenda packet, so if you do plan to address this tonight, we ask that you tell us the most relevant, the most materials, or the most important points you really want us to focus on. Finally, we are a community of neighbors, and as such, we want our meetings to be as civil and courteous as possible. So as a courtesy to those around you, please take this time to turn off your cell phones and other mobile devices. And while we're turning off our phones, would the clerk please call the roll?
Trustee Sullivan.
Here.
Trustee Kennedy.
Here.
Trustee Dodd.
Here.
Trustee Kurzman.
Here.
Trustee Barrow.
Here.
Trustee Plunkett.
Here.
President Belinsky.
Here. We're all here, so we obviously have a quorum. Next item on the agenda is item 2, public comment. During public comment, individuals are allotted up to 3 minutes to address the board on an item which is not on the agenda. Members of the audience may address the board on matters which are on tonight's agenda when the particular matter is called. So is there any member of the audience who would like to address the board on a matter which is not on tonight's agenda? May I see a show of hands? Okay, moving on. The next item is item 3, and that is the consent agenda. As described on the printed agenda, items which are routine business that are not normally debated by the Village Board are placed on the consent agenda. All items that begin with the number 3 are on the consent agenda. So tonight, that means the consent agenda begins with item 3.1 on page 1. It's all the items on page 2. And then almost all the items on page 3 going down to page number 3.18. Items on the consent agenda are up for approval tonight, and if an item is not removed by a member of the audience and is not removed by one of the trustees, the item will be approved and it will not be discussed. So I'll begin by asking, is there any member of the audience who would like to remove an item from the consent agenda? May I see a show of hands? Okay, I'll move to the trustees. Any items that any of the trustees would like to remove from the consent agenda? Okay, seeing none, may I have a motion to adopt the consent agenda?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. Would the clerk please call the roll on the motion to adopt the consent agenda?
Trustee Sullivan.
Aye.
Trustee Kennedy.
Aye.
Trustee Dodd.
Aye.
Trustee Kurzman.
Aye.
Trustee Barrow.
Aye.
Trustee Plunkett.
Aye.
President Belinsky.
Aye. So motion carries. The consent agenda has been adopted. If you are here for an item on the consent agenda, it was just approved. And to clarify for people who are here tonight, again, all the items beginning with the 3 have been approved. That includes land use items 3.4, 3.5, and 3.6. Also includes Municipal Services Committee item 3.13. So if you were here for one of those items, it was just approved. There'll be no further discussion of those items or any of the other items on the consent agenda. So you are free to leave. Of course, you are more than welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting. If you are leaving now, it's still very early, so please stop by one of our downtown restaurants before heading home. And as an incentive, there are now coupons on the table by the door. This is a $5 off coupon. It can be used only tonight at certain participating restaurants that are downtown. So if you do decide to leave at some point during the meeting or after the meeting, you can use that coupon at one of our local restaurants. Moving on, item 4. Excuse me. Item 4 is report of officers, and I actually have a report tonight. I have some prepared remarks that I will read. At the August 27th Village Board meeting, the village staff provided the Village Board with an initial briefing on the new Illinois state law, which will take effect on January 1st, 2020, allowing the recreational use of cannabis by persons over 21, and also allowing the sale of cannabis for recreational use by businesses. With regard to the legal use of cannabis by persons 21 or older, the state has preempted local government authority on that subject, and the village will need to amend its village code and zoning ordinance to be consistent with the provisions of this part of the new state law. The other part of the new state law is the licensing of businesses to sell cannabis for recreational use. Municipalities do have the authority to either prohibit these businesses or permit them and regulate how many there are and where they may be located. Choices in this regard have generated considerable public concern and debate. Some municipalities want to facilitate the new cannabis businesses and regulate them accordingly. Others have indicated their intent to prohibit such businesses. Others, however, have taken what I think is the most prudent approach, which is to initially enact a moratorium ordinance, maintaining the status quo by prohibiting the sale of recreational cannabis, and then taking the time to observe the experiences in other towns where dispensaries are permitted. A moratorium would allow us to be more informed with that information and also give us an opportunity to ask the entire community for its input in the broadest manner possible. That is the intention I intend to recommend to the board. I also think it is important for us to offer a clear message to village residents and allay any concerns and uncertainty they may have over what happens here on January 1st. And so to that end, and under my authority as village president, I'm asking the village manager and the staff to do the following. First, prepare and submit to the village board for introduction on September 24th, 2019, a moratorium ordinance prohibiting recreational cannabis dispensaries in Wilmette or the sale of cannabis for recreational non-medicinal purposes. 2, prepare and submit to the village board for introduction on September 24th, 2019, such ordinances as are required to make the necessary technical amendments to the village code and zoning ordinance and tax provisions consistent with the new state law, and also to designate the Judiciary Committee as a special zoning committee for technical zoning amendments. 3, at the appropriate time in 2020, as provided for in the Illinois Election Code, prepare and submit to the village board the appropriate resolution to add an advisory referendum question to the November 3rd, 2020 presidential election ballot, asking residents whether the village should permit recreational sale of cannabis. Now, in making the recommendation for a referendum, I do recognize that there was a March 2018 Cook County-wide referendum in which Wilmette residents voted by a margin of roughly 2-to-1 in favor of legalization of cannabis for recreational use by adults. However, I do think that there is a possibility that had residents been asked a different question, that is the question of whether we should permit the sale of cannabis at a dispensary in the village, that people may have different answers for those two questions. So a 2020 referendum question that squarely addressed the question is what I believe the course we should take. And because we're doing it in November 2020 when there's a presidential election, it would ensure the maximum likely participation of voters and also give them additional time to learn more and to see what's happening elsewhere. So that is the direction that I'm giving to the staff, and we will introduce that ordinance at the next meeting. And the following meeting, we'll have a discussion and debate to as much as the trustees would like, and we will either vote or choose to table and defer it. But as the staff outlined at the last meeting, we do have to make some decisions by January 1st, 2020. Okay? So move on to the next report is from our village manager, Mr. Frenzer.
No report, Mr. President.
Next report is from our corporation counsel, Mr. Stein.
No report, Mr. Mayor.
Next item on the agenda is item 5, report of the Liquor Control Commissioner. There's no report tonight, so we'll move on to our standing committee reports. First up, as always, is the Land Use Committee, Trustee Barrow.
Thank you, President Belinsky. I move to remove item 6.11 from the table.
Okay, so there's a motion to remove 611 from the table. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, all those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Okay, so the item's been removed from the table.
Thank you. I move to approve Historic Preservation Commission Report number 2019 HPC-02.2 for 301 Sheridan Road regarding a request for a certificate of appropriateness for revisions to a previously approved plans for an attached garage addition.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. Mr. Adler, would you approach? So, this is a case that we all saw last week. Mr. Adler's not going to do his, or not last week, at our last meeting, 2 weeks ago. Mr. Adler's not going to do his usual presentation, although in discussion with him, I thought that it was appropriate. We don't see many of these cases, Historic Preservation Commission cases, in front of this board, and there's a different set of standards of review for our use and also for the applicant's information. These are the standards which we use to evaluate the request. And John's going to put them up, and we're not going to be able to read them, but the so, and they're actually called the Standards for Rehabilitation, and there are 10 of them. And Mr. Adler, would you agree with my opinion is that there's really 3 that are the operative standards in this particular case?
Yes.
Okay, so, and I'm going to read those out loud for the benefit of everybody, including the trustees and the applicant. So, standard number 2 reads as follows. The distinguishing original qualities or character of a building structure or site and its environment shall not be destroyed. The removal or alteration of any historic material or distinctive architectural features shall be avoided when possible. Standard number 6 is deteriorated architectural features shall be repaired rather than replaced whenever possible, or wherever possible. In the event replacement is necessary, the new material should match the material being replaced in position, design, color, texture, and other visual qualities. Repair or replacement of missing architectural features should be based on accurate duplication of features substantiated by historical, physical, or pictorial evidence rather than on conjectural designs or the availability of different architectural elements from other buildings or structures. What I should have said to the trustees is this is on page 247 of the PDF if you want to follow along here.
Of today's PDF, or?
Yes, of today's meeting's PDF. And I believe it's the same, these are the same words up on the screen, except you probably can read them on your iPad. And then there's number 9, which says as follows: contemporary design for alterations and additions to existing properties shall not be discouraged when such alterations and additions do not destroy significant historical, architectural, or cultural material, and such design is compatible with the size, scale, color, material, and character of the property, neighborhood, or environment. So for the trustees, these are the different set of standards that we apply in this particular case. And again, this is the standards. And for the applicant, these are the standards of review that you should address in your presentation to us. And I know there's lots of great pictures, and it looks really cool, but for both the trustees, this isn't a matter of personal taste. This is, do we believe the standards of review have been met or not? Mr. Adler, would you add anything to sort of my introductory remarks?
I think that's a great description of the process.
Okay. And
I'm sorry, can I just ask, I'm not seeing it on page 254 of today's.
47.
Okay, 247, thank you. Okay.
Since this came with a positive recommendation, it just needs 4 votes?
Correct.
Even on HPC, even a negative is just 4, isn't it?
Yeah.
Or so that's just a zoning
Yep.
situation. Okay, any other questions? Mr. Adler's up there, so. Okay, so I will call the applicant up. The floor is yours.
There you go. Thanks.
And so this is also in front of all of the trustees as well.
It's the same one that was in the presentation, right?
Yeah, that's right. It's also, I believe, the same, it is the same presentation as was
Another one was
submitted.
sent because I think page 25 came out blank in the original one that was sent Friday. So one I think was sent today. It'll come up there. Yeah, if we go through it. Last time, Trustee Sullivan, after we had left, you said there was no levity in the presentation, which I would agree with you on the last time. So I'd just like to say my family wish they could be here tonight, but they cannot because it's my middle son's birthday. So he's watching at home on Channel 6, so I just wanted to wish him happy birthday. So it's now time to go to bed. So I have some prepared remarks, which I will read through, and I think we'll address some of this and also some confusion I think maybe I have. Trustees, let me apologize to all of you that we're here tonight and taking your time. While it was not abundantly clear to us at the time, we would not be here if we'd followed the process. We made the same apology to the commissioners at the HPC. I would like to add that given we have a community to live in with all of you and many of the people that are here, some are supporting us tonight, there's some likelihood over the next couple of decades we'll be in front of you again, or at least in front of the HPC with the home that we own. And we wanted you to know, and my wife Tiffany wanted you to know, there was nothing nefarious that happened here. It was not an intentional act that we did. We believe that we were doing the best thing and the right thing for this house. I think there are a number of important comments that should be considered by this board as you think about your vote. First, we agree with the letter from the Historic Museum in where Kathy writes, "What is the purpose of landmarking a home but to maintain its integrity? The Historic Preservation Committee is supposed to oversee that task," she writes. And we agree with that. The role of the HPC is to oversee the integrity of homes like ours in Wilmette. John and his team were kind enough to share with us the recordings of the last two HPC committee meetings, and that allowed us to refresh our memories on what was said in those meetings. There are two relevant comments made by Chair Hutchinson at the HPC at that meeting as follows. The first one, Chair Hutchinson apologized and went on to describe why he did so. He said, "Part of this is our fault, for sure, because I don't think we specifically told you at the time, if you don't do exactly what you were telling us, you need to come back to us. Maybe it was implied, maybe it was in the package you were given, but I don't think we made it abundantly clear. So I think it's a learning process for us as well. Moving forward with homeowners, with approved projects, we need to be clear, this is what we expect of the homeowners and architects." The second comes in the context of the vote. Chair Hutchinson describes how he thinks about his vote. "I'm not going to tell the commissioners how they need to vote. I will be personally looking at this and saying, if you come back to us and explained why you wanted to make these changes, you did, would I likely have approved them at that time? This is how I will be looking at it, personally. I can imagine each one of these would have been a different visit, coming back and saying, here's the deal, and here's why we want to make the change. While the Wilmette Code in Section 1014 asks for the Commission to give due consideration to the Secretary of Interior standards and the rights of property owners, it has 4 items that are required for approval. Item number 1 is the alteration does not materially impair the historical significance of the Wilmette landmark. Item 2, the alteration does not materially impair the architectural integrity of the Wilmette landmark or Wilmette Historic District. Item number 3, the alteration is carried out in a manner consistent with the historical architectural character of the Wilmette landmark. It is not item number 4, it is not economically practical to preserve the Wilmette landmark or contributing structure with the historic district without alteration or demolition. The section goes on to state, if the proposal does not meet the above stated criteria, the Historic Commission shall recommend that the application be denied. We can only conclude that the HPC used these criteria and due consideration to our rights and the Secretary of Interior standards when casting their votes. On each of these three motions, the HPC voted to approve the changes with a supermajority. Motion 1, the metal roof. HPC voted 5 yeas and 1 nay, 83.3% in favor. Motion 2, the window openings and door changes. HPC voted 6 yeas, 100% in favor. Motion 3, the porch columns. HPC voted 4 yeas and 2 nays, 66.7% in our favor. We think of our time at 301 Sheridan simply as the custodians of an amazing historic home. And our role is to maintain this home and to make sure that the next homeowners enjoy it as much as we will. As you've likely read in the materials we provided, we made a number of decisions in the remodel of our home, and I'm happy to answer any additional questions you might have about those changes.
Questions for the applicant? Okay.
So I'm happy to go through the materials if you guys want.
If you'd like to.
I'm not sure who's gone through them or not.
Well, we all received them in the packet. So, which was the picture that wasn't? I saw the blank page. I remember.
Page 25. So,
was this the east elevation?
That's the east elevation. So it has each of the elevations.
This is the front. Yeah, this is the front.
It's the front of the house. Yeah.
Yeah.
There was comments as well, I think, with regards to metal roofs, and we provided a couple of examples in the village. So 937 Park Avenue, which is also a historic home. It's on the register. It's actually in the same book that the 802 Lake House, which was torn down, was in as well. But that has a front porch that has a metal standing roof. It was built at the same time. It is on the historic registry, and it's in the village of Wilmette. The second home is 932 Forest. Again, won the Historic Preservation Award, was built at approximately the same time, has a front porch that has a seam with a standing metal roof, and again is in the village of Wilmette. And then 706 Forest Avenue, they were asked to join the historic landmark list. The homeowners declined for various reasons. But their front porch also has a metal, front metal porch has a metal standing roof as well. It's also a Queen Anne home. Those are 3 examples. I think the last time Trustee Dodd asked were the homes in Wilmette for some of the examples that we've given, so we thought we would provide some examples that are in Wilmette.
Thank you.
There's a comment around the round windows. With a house and a journey going through this process, certainly that picture, which is really small in this image, and I apologize for that, but the one at the top, there is as of 1905, there was a round...
Page 206 in the PDF, if you want to. Oh, it's a hard copy too, obviously. Never mind.
Sorry, I have a bigger picture of it. I have that's the bigger version of it, but it's not. It's still quite hard to see. But on the right-hand side, in 1905, there was a circular window there. When we opened up the walls of the house, this is that same room from the interior. The right-hand side of that image up above, left-hand side of that image up above, there was no round window there before. There was a round window on the right-hand side as of 1905, but once we took the materials out, we concluded that there were no round windows on this house to start with. And so we made the decision to put on the garage, instead of a round window, to put square windows, and we chose to return back to the siding treatment that was on the outside of the house as of 1905, rather than putting windows in those 2 locations. And the porch columns, there have been a variety of porch columns on this house. If you go all the way back to the beginning, at least the earliest photo we have, which is in 1905, we can only assume that, which is the top right-hand picture here, we can only assume that they were the round spindle columns. As you move forward in the life of the house, various aspects were removed. And we can only conclude, based on the building permits, that the original porch on the back of the house was removed by the previous homeowner. So we don't know actually what the porch columns even looked like. And so we made some decisions. We made a number of decisions on the house that we thought were the right thing for the house. And again, when we went through the process with HPC, we thought we were doing what was right for the house.
Okay, and those were the 3, my recollection, you've covered all 3 of the points. You had the metal
Those are the
roof,
3 motions,
the,
yeah. And I also,
the round windows, and the square.
Square columns rather than round columns. Square columns are on the side porch when we purchased the house. Round columns that are roughly 12 inches in diameter, not the spindly columns, are on the back, on the front of the house, and on the rear of the house, which is I can't find it. The rear of the house had a tall structure that was 2 stories in height, which I don't have, which isn't in here. But there's a square column porch in here as well.
You're referring to the old porch, or the porch that was removed, or?
So the porch that was removed had square columns on it when we moved into the house.
Okay.
The porch on the back of the house was square columns. It was a 2-story porch. It had a patio on the top of it.
Right, that one's not, that one.
That's not there. Well,
Right.
that's what we took off.
Yeah.
That was when we met with the HPC and with the village very early on. That was one of the items that they really certainly they had represented they wanted removed.
Okay. Okay.
I have
Trustee
a
Kennedy?
question. Yeah, I'm still a little confused about, there was a suggestion that you replaced the shingles on the roof over the front porch because the pitch of the roof was not suitable for shingles.
Yeah, that was a comment that was made by our architect,
Is
and
that-
something
You don't
I
know.
mean, John and I have talked about it, and it's a horse apiece. So as to whether it would be that, the roof itself, so we thought the roof was in good shape, and actually when we went to the HPC, at that meeting, the first meeting, we told them we think this roof is in fine shape. Turns out when we got into the house, there was some work that was done in the house that was done outside of permit, and there were water was running through the exterior walls, and that had caused damage to that roof. And so we decided that we had a chance to fix it, so we decided to fix the roof. We decided the material that we were going to go with was going to be the metal, was a standing seam roof.
So that wasn't because you couldn't put shingles there, but for some other reason that you chose metal
So
over
we chose
replacing?
because the other porch that we had there was also a metal roof as well.
Right.
Questions? Okay. Have a s-
President Belinsky,
Yep.
I perhaps share some of Trustee Sullivan's questioning about the rationale for the roof materials. It seems that that's an
Trustee Kennedy?
Trustee Kennedy, I'm sorry.
I was going to say, I haven't spoken yet.
No, he hasn't spoken yet. No, Trustee Kennedy.
We're hard to tell apart.
Yeah, reading your mind. At our last meeting, the explanation was that you were concerned that shingles wouldn't work in that location. And then
That shingles wouldn't work in that location.
the shingles would not,
I think we were talking about wood. We were talking about wood material. Using a wood shingle on the house in general was of concern to us.
and then you also, or the architects expressed a concern that it was raining or going to rain, and there wasn't sufficient time to go back to the HPC, so you needed to make a decision very promptly and quickly. And are you, is that still part of your explanation for why we're in the posture we're in?
So certainly, if we had known, it was more clear to us the process that we had to go back each time, we would have gone back each time. But it wasn't totally clear that that's what we had to do. As homeowners, that certainly is part of it.
And let me ask you then, as an experienced person, because I know you have experience doing this, and your architect is experienced in doing this, how is it that you thought you didn't need to go back to the HPC?
So it wasn't clear that we had to. So in previous, when we've done this previously, making decisions on the fly in a home. So if we had gone back for each of these three items, as Chair Hutchinson had pointed out, we would have been 9 months in the, we're not going to, no movement on the project on those specific areas, because each of those processes take roughly 3 months.
Well, I can't speak to the timing of it, but,
Oh, sorry, I thought that's what you were asking.
well, yeah, I can't speak whether it's 9 months or some longer or shorter period. But the process here is concerning to me.
I
It's
completely agree.
concerning to me that we're receiving an explanation that's consistent and credible.
Mm-hmm.
And candidly, I'm not sure that I've heard that yet.
Okay.
So can I ask a follow-up question to what Trustee Barrow is saying that I think would be helpful, which is, I think it would be helpful for us as trustees to understand why did you change the original plans? So why did you change what was intended to be an original asphalt roof, which was in the plans, and obviously as somebody who's done a lot of work, you understand obviously the architectural plans. So why did you change from an asphalt to metal? Why did you change the columns from round to square? And why did you change the windows?
Sure.
So you've provided lots of examples, you've provided but I'm not sure it's clear
Yeah, it's fine.
why those decisions. So then we have a process question, but I still think it's not clear to me why for any of those.
Sure. So the windows, I'll start with the windows. The windows, we didn't believe after we had gone through the process in the house and discovered when we'd opened walls up that round windows existed on this house at any period in time, at the original period when this house was built. As of 1905, there certainly was a circular opening to a small closet that had a pane of glass in it that was a window. But prior to that, it was our belief, based on that, when we opened the wall, that's what this picture is, we didn't believe that round windows existed on the house. So because of that, we didn't feel like if we went back and put round windows on, someone at some point in time, 100 years from now, would say, oh, this house had round windows originally. And in actual fact, it did not. So we felt as though we need to not put round windows on the garage. We need to put square windows on the garage because we need it to be a separate structure rather than being that, hey, this has always existed and it's always been attached to this house, which it is not. And so we felt as though it needed to be a separate thing. The second item, which is the roof, one of the discussions that we had at HPC was this massive asphalt-looking thing between the garage and the porch, and is there a way to separate them? We didn't agree in that meeting that we were going to do something or not going to do something, but we felt as though we needed to have provide some separation between those two things so that visually they look separate rather than the same. As far as the front roof, it was during the construction process. It was during the, go ahead.
So, okay, keep going, sorry.
I can pause if you have a question.
I don't recall there being anything in the HPC notes that talked about wanting to separate the roof of the garage from the roof of, I just don't remember seeing that in the
Actually, let's,
comments.
you know,
And I'm just, before you go on, I just want to say, was that in the comments that we received?
I think that's part of the process. Mr. Adler or Kate, do you want to?
Because the comments that I see in the HPC were that you were going to put in asphalt shingles.
So I think that was what was in the outcome.
From the 2017 meeting?
But, Mr. Adler, one of the questions I thought, I don't know where I've accumulated this knowledge, whether it's from this case or another case, but that when you do these things, you want them to be removable, and you want them you're not trying to blend in the new with the old. You're trying to preserve the old and distinguish the new, as opposed to trying to pretend that the new was part of the old. Is that,
I think you're referring to Standard 9, which talks about when you're doing an addition, the addition itself.
or standard 10, maybe? The one that says you should be able to remove it.
9,
And
contemporary designs.
Oh, okay, okay.
Where it talks basically it's okay to have a contemporary design. It wants you to have the mass and the scale, and wants you to have the character and the color of the existing house. But if you do something arguably more modern, an example is the Historical Museum. The addition, when you look at it, it fits in really well, but when you look closely at it, it's a much different style of the way they did the brick on it. But the massing, the colors, the materials all work to supplement, to pay tribute to the historic portion of the home.
It's new, not trying to pretend to be old, but it blends in well with the old. Is that one way to
Yes.
say it?
That's a
Okay.
good way of saying
Okay.
it.
Okay.
Yes, and I wasn't at the meeting, but I believe that the idea of, because this was a fairly large, the porch was large compared to what was, well, there was a two-story porch, but now it's a wraparound porch, that wouldn't surprise me if the idea of trying to decrease that mass by the construction of the design of the porch was discussed.
Okay, well, the question was around, I think it was the notion of there being some sort of separation in terms of style or something with the garage versus the house.
Right, definitely with the garage, the idea that the garage, if somebody ever chose at a later date to be able to remove the garage and to have the garage sort of off to the side and not arguably overwhelming the main historic structure was a concern.
Okay, all right, so it's,
I have a question. It might be for Mr. Adler, because just in reading the initial request in 2017, was there anything that the homeowner did to preserve the original house? I mean, were any, can we balance anything that the homeowner did to preserve the home as it had been to compare to the changes that were made? I'd like to kind of see the whole project.
I think probably, and correct me if I'm wrong, there was a two-story patio that had a walkout, and that would be, if you actually look, well, we could, I'm sure we have, where the window, the darker window was, I believe, was that a door? Am I? And so what they did was, one of the things they did was, you see that picture up on the right where you've got the two windows side by side. That's the view from, is that from Maple? Yeah.
I think John, I think page 12 has,
shows that.
12 shows the old porch, the two-story porch.
Okay, thank you. Oh, right, yeah. Yeah, right there, right. And so, yeah. And that, what you see up there on the right was not original. That was added later on. The door was put in, and so I think that's one of the things that you did to bring back that elevation more to being the way it was back in the early 1900s. The applicant can speak to other things that might have been done, but that's I think the most obvious one.
Was Was attention made to replicate the way it was in the 1900s, or just to get rid of the porch and make it look better? I wanted to see, in terms of, the characteristics that we wanted to preserve, what has been preserved, what got better, what didn't get preserved. I want to see where the balance sheet is.
I don't believe back in 2017 the HPC really looked for that side porch to replicate or look like it would have if it was on the structure originally. I don't think that ultimately was their intention. Now, I think that they would say that they were concerned about the massing, the character, the color, the materials, but whether it replicated something that the original porch on that from 2005, I don't think that's what they were looking for the applicant to do.
But the removal of the back porch was something they were looking for the applicant to do?
Yeah,
or
I don't
That
think
was
they were, that back porch was added at a later date, and it's 1990, I don't think the HPC had a concern with that. I think ultimately they were probably happy that that door was going away, that the window was being replicated. I think originally when it was discussed, and there was the thought process that there were two windows there, I'm sure they liked that idea. We've since learned that there was the one window that was put in sometime prior to 1907, and then there was no window on the other side. So I think they didn't have that information back then in 2017.
Well, and I guess I'd ask the applicant to answer the same question. You did the work, so how would you address Trustee Plunkett's question of, sort of what did you do that you think was positive in terms of preserving this house and the like?
Yeah. When I think about this house, our goal is for it to last way past us, right? And so there's lots of work that's been done inside, which we could talk about, but I don't know whether the Board of Trustees cares about the work that's been done inside. So I'd ask, do you want me to cover work inside and outside, or do you want me to
Well, I don't think
outside?
the HPC even covers, you
No,
can do
they
whatever
don't-
you want with
they
the
don't
interior.
They don't cover interior,
Right.
but your question was quite broad in that so maintaining a house, putting solid insulation into every wall is going to make sure that house lasts longer, right? And so taking all of that out, taking the gas lines out, having a floor replicated up in Wisconsin so that it matches what was currently in the house, having blacksmiths redo the doors inside the house so they still worked. Those are a number of things that we did. As far as the porch goes, I know, John, you weren't at the meeting, but the back porch was considered to be an eyesore. And a number of our friends have sent in letters. A number of our neighbors have sent in letters where the back of this house was horrific. It should never have been added to this house, in my opinion. I think
It wasn't landmarked when it was added, right? It was landmarked after.
It wasn't so that's
was
a
landmarked
fair comment.
Yeah.
It wasn't. It was they did all the work and then they landmarked it. We felt as though we put a porch on this house that represented the house. That is a porch that should be on the house. Every single person that has been by the house that hasn't been aware of this process has commented in the neighborhood the work that we have done on this house and made it just an amazing house. From the outside, that most of the people have never been inside our home. We felt as though when we went through the process of putting on a metal roof, we could have put a shingle roof on this house. It's a lot less expensive, and certainly as you're going through a project of this size and scale, I certainly got to a point where, like, why don't we just put shingles on it? But if you were to look at the back of this house and you looked at shingles on the roof and then shingles on the porch, it would have looked like a large mass of shingles. It wouldn't have given this house any credit that it should have had. When it came to things like making decisions on, we were going to put round windows on this building. But when we found out that it didn't have round windows, that we felt as though the right decision for this house was not to put round windows on this building. And so that was a decision that we went through to say, okay, hey, you know what, from a design standpoint, the round windows actually look kind of cool. But reality is that wasn't what this house had. That wasn't what this house had when it was first built. And so as we reflect on that, we made a decision to do something different. With regards to the front porch, we debated back and forth on the front porch. And ultimately, we came back to a point and said, you know what, reality is, this is the material that we think should be on the roof of this house. And so we made a decision to do so. We believe it will make the front porch last longer. We believe it will make the house last longer on all the aspects of things that we have done on the outside of this house. From picking the spindles that are on the side porch so they match the ones that are on the front of the porch and having them custom made. To the railings, the same thing. And so I believe we made a number of decisions that were about historical homes. We don't have enough people in Wilmette that care about historical homes, to be candid. Right? 802 got torn down. 802 is on the front cover of that book in the presentation that I shared. Arguably a more important house than our house. It was the center of where all the social activity happened in Wilmette, and it's been torn down. And so for us, to look at this, I believe that we have put 4 years of our time in figuring out how to make this house something that Wilmette is proud of, rather than aspects of it that people are not proud of. And I believe that what we have done to this house is the right thing for this house. And would I have made the fundamental thing that I would have done differently standing here today is I would have followed the process. Had I known the process in detail, I would have followed the process. And as Chair Hutchison pointed out, he wasn't aware of the process. It wasn't abundantly clear the process that we needed to follow. We would have followed that process. And so I sit here in front of you today, and I believe we did the right thing for this house.
Further questions?
It seems to me sort of self-evident what the process should be, in the sense that why go to all the trouble of submitting original plans, getting them reviewed by the Historic Preservation Committee, getting their sign-off, if you can then just go change anything willy-nilly? It seems to me sort of inherent in the idea that you need approval of the plans, that you'll stick to them, or if you aren't going to, that you'll come back and ask for permission to do something different.
So the difference in our process, we certainly did the work and then came back and asked.
Right.
And then the HPC voted as if they had a choice to tell us to change the stuff in the HPC, as if we had been in front of them for the first time asking for it, and they voted not to. And granted, the work was already done, but they could have chosen to make us change it.
Well, I think you do have to recognize that it's very difficult for people to ask you to undo something you've done. And so as much as you'd like, as much as all of us would like to say we're making this decision as if it didn't happen, that's very, very difficult to do. And I can't...
It still doesn't address the question she asked, which is, you came after the fact. Why didn't you come before why go through all the time to put plans together and ask for them to be approved and then not follow the plans?
Right.
I still don't understand. I'm still fundamentally don't understand that answer.
Right. But again, from a process standpoint, we didn't fully understand the process. And many of these decisions that were made, Eric, our architect, he wasn't involved in all these decisions. As the homeowners, we made these decisions. We were standing with the builder, and we made these decisions. We didn't go through a process saying, let's go consult our architect and find out. We did the research ourselves because it's something we enjoy doing, to be honest. And so, as homeowners, we didn't know the process. And the comments made by the HPC, they weren't fully aware of it either. And so they didn't make it abundantly clear that this is what needed to happen. And so there is room for error. I'm absolutely sorry we didn't follow the process, because the headache that I have created for you guys and created for us is not just my headache. Because reality is, if the vote that happens tonight is one that actually I believe is going to affect long term, if people are going to choose to put their houses on this list or not. And so I think about that as hey, you know what? I don't want to be the guy that people point to and say, you know why we don't have any more houses on this list? It's because of what you did. That's a big thing, not a small thing, in my opinion. And so it really matters to me.
Well, I did read the record, and I'm not sure that I agree that the commissioners on HPC didn't know what the process was. I think they did.
I was just reading a quote from the tapes.
I think what he meant was that he wasn't sure they made it clear to you, but I think they knew.
But he does go on to say, in the future, we should. So I don't think
yeah.
that's not... No, we should to
But
other
we should.
homeowners?
Well, no, they should make the process clear, not that they didn't know what the process was. I'm convinced they knew what the process was.
Okay.
In 2017, when you went to the Historic Preservation Commission, you came with a few things were potentially controversial. You had neighbors saying that, an attached garage was completely, inconsistent with the character of this home. And it looks like the HPC still granted all of your requests. Was there anything at that time? It doesn't seem like a burden. You went with significant changes to a very historic home, and it looks like they still granted everything that you'd asked for.
They did grant everything that we had asked for.
Okay.
And Trustee Plunkett's a former chair of the Historic Preservation Commission as well, so, look, the applicant is not the only person who has come up in front of us and said they didn't understand the process. Having done a renovation myself, you cannot rely on your professionals to do your work yourself, because the number of times that my wife, who's sort of a bulldog with construction professionals, the number of times a professional has said, you don't need a permit for that, and my wife says, yes, you do, go down to Village Hall and confirm that, and they come back and say, oh, wow, I needed a permit for this. I had no idea. I've been working in the village for 20 years, and I've never gotten permits for these things. So it does happen. We can all, and in every case, no offense intended to you at all, but in every case, the trustees have to form their own opinion of the credibility. And I'm not, again, suggesting you're not being credible, but sometimes the stories range quite a bit, and part of what we're doing is judging the credibility of that as well. So it's not unheard of that somebody wouldn't understand one of our processes. But that said, you're also an experienced, this is not your first rehab. And every place has a different set of processes. Absolutely. And all the rest of the stuff. So it is ultimately on you that you didn't understand the process, and that's why you're standing here.
So we didn't follow the process. We understand that now. We should have followed the process, and it's like, Trustee Kennedy, it is like saying, okay, yes, but you did the work already. I get that. I feel like once we found out we didn't follow the process, we then followed the process. We went back to the HPC. We went and met with the HPC, and we went through that process with the HPC to get approval for the changes that we made.
How did you find out that you hadn't followed the process?
From the village.
Oh, you mean they told you you hadn't?
Yeah, I was not aware of it until we received notice from the village.
Got it.
Other questions for the applicant? Trustee Kurzman, you look like you're about to say something. Trustee Kennedy?
Could we go through each of the sort of changes and see what we feel about them individually?
We will.
Good.
Can I just ask a question to John Adler, or should I wait for that?
You can, well, let's, first off, anything more for the applicant? We can bring Mr. Adler back up, too. Don't go far. I know you're not going anywhere. Well, your coupons, the coupon will be good still. You may need it.
I just had a quick question for you, John, on understanding what is the Historic Preservation Award, and how is that different than the landmark status, just to help us understand,
Sure.
since some of the drawings in here.
Preservation Award is just a way to honor homeowners, architects, and contractors for doing, could be sympathetic additions, could be restorations, could be, actually new homes have received awards that fit in with a neighborhood. Typically, there's no historic designation, meaning it's not a local landmark or in the National Register, but they're homes of some significance that the owner has chosen to do, again, work on it that the commission feels should be recognized.
It's an annual ceremony. It's actually it's a lot of fun to go
No,
to.
I just wanted to understand. I just wanted to ask the question.
Yeah, for everybody's preference. I understand.
Maybe you could just review briefly, too, what it means to be a local landmark. I mean, there's local landmarks, there's national landmarks.
Sure.
There are, certain benefits to having your home designated as such.
Yeah, well, the difference between a local landmark and being on the National Register is a local landmark provides protection. When somebody chooses to landmark their property, doing a local landmark, the house can't be torn down. So people who buy it in the future, they do not have the ability to tear that house down. If it's on the National Register, and we do have, I believe, a couple of structures that are on the National Register and not local landmarks, those actually don't have the same protections. They can be demolished. So local landmark is really the strongest protection we have for a structure, and the village board at the last meeting approved another local landmark, which we were excited to see. We've actually have had some pretty good response to us reaching out to what we feel are significant homes that should be landmarked, and I think there have been maybe 3 landmarked in the last year or 2, which is great.
That's just for clarification, that's a completely voluntary process.
Correct, completely
The owners come and
voluntary.
say, I'd like to put the limitation on this property so that it's preserved.
Exactly, and in this case, it's, well, the Neelys bought it knowing that it was a local landmark. It was a owner to, I think, maybe 2 or 3 people before they bought it that landmarked the property. We also have National Register districts, and there is those, that's honorific, meaning structures within the district, and the biggest one we have basically falls along the cage, the Chestnut, Ashland, Greenwood, Elmwood area of the village. But there is no limitation. If somebody wants to tear down a structure, they can. But if you are in that national district, you do have the ability to seek a property tax freeze, which is one of the benefits that you could get by being a local landmark. In doing, I don't know the exact percentage, but you have to do, I think it might be like 25% of the sort of the value of the structure or the value of the home to qualify. And you could do that both by being on the National Register in a National Register district or being a local landmark. But again, a local landmark is really what is necessary to prevent demolition of a structure.
And for clarity, that relates really to the outside of the structure. It doesn't, like HPC doesn't talk about what you're doing in your kitchen or your bathrooms. It's the outside, the external
Correct,
portion.
for the way in which our local, yes, exactly.
Trustee Cruz.
So I want to be sensitive to the fact that the HPC are volunteers, and we certainly appreciate their service. But here we are with something, and the board is being tasked with delving into a skill set it may or may not have a lot of experience with. We've heard from the applicant some of their perspective for how this came to be, but from a process standpoint, is there something that we can learn about the HPC process that either broke down or needs refinement such that this wouldn't happen? Is this a one-off, or is this something that we can
Right.
expect to see more of?
Well, hopefully it's a one-off, but that doesn't stop us from trying to improve a process that we have in place. We've had this process and have been granting certificate of appropriatenesses for a number of years. But one of the things we thought is exactly what President Belinsky asked us to do. What staff will do in the future is not only provide the standards, make sure, and the applicant did back in 2017 go through the standards when they were asking for their addition, but also we could give staff's input on those standards so that there was recommendations or thoughts from staff in there, but to have the standards and to pull out the applicable standards, because they're not, probably in most cases, you're probably going to have 3 or 4 of these standards that are applicable to a request, and to lay it out for the commission then to make their decision and go on record of why, if they're going to grant something, they feel it's meeting the standards, or why, if they're not going to, it's not meeting the standards, similar to what the zoning board does. And so, again, it hasn't been necessary up to this point. Doesn't mean even if this didn't happen, it's probably a good thing to do. The other thing which would have been really helpful is when it comes to additions on local landmarks that had to get certificate of appropriateness, is we typically will go out near the end of construction and see if there were changes. What probably makes more sense is to go out during the framing inspection, because you could see, especially window openings and things like that. Also to have that dialogue to make sure that, well, and I understand I might sit here and say it's fairly obvious. Not to every, it's what I do, so maybe it's fairly obvious to me. So to make sure that when we're out there, to make sure that the applicant knows. We do have a a very significant historic structure on the lakefront that's undergoing a relatively large addition. Now, that's one in which they've gone to the state, because you have to go to the state to get the tax freeze. So there's an extra layer of protection there where the state is going to go out and verify these also, but it's a perfect time for us to also go out and make sure that if there are changes, we catch them early. We could stop the construction at that time and bring the applicant in. We could also make sure that the applicant is aware that what they may deem as being minor might not be minor, depending on the structure and the location of the work they're proposing. So those are two things that we're definitely going to, again, I don't want to necessarily say that because our process worked well, but it's definitely going to make the process better.
We don't have the resources to do that on every single
no.
zoning variance and every single permit and everything else. But in the case of the historic, we have a couple, how many of these are probably under construction today? 2 or 3?
Yeah. I mean, right now, I think it's 2 or, 2. Yeah.
So I think in the notes, I think it was Commissioner Fidus that said that he had been on the commission the longest, and he had never seen a case where work was done, that was not approved. And I have to say, I was on the board before him, and I can't remember of a case where work was done that was not approved. The Historic Preservation Commission is not a zoning board. They're not used to cases like this where, work is done without a permit, or it's a difficult situation, I think, that they had to face, that
It is.
that the work was done and they had to look at it and say, how do we handle this now? Because I think maybe in the last 10 years, if not longer, the Historic Preservation Commission has never had a case like this.
Right.
Yeah, the 8 years I've been on the board, I don't remember having this much conversation about this board, that is, about a case. So between your service and mine, I don't think
The
there's
other
been one
thing
like
we
that.
talked about, again, internally is, and again, because we have so few of these, this isn't that difficult for us to do, but to make sure that and one of the problems, we sometimes have so many zoning conditions on approval that it goes to 2 pages, and one might say, at that point, do people really read it? But we can make sure that there's things that talk about, even minor changes, while, again, we might feel that it should be something that everybody should know, but we could also make sure that there's more wording on the zoning certification, which basically goes into detail about what needs to be done, because this is a historic structure.
Trustee Dodd?
John, how often does the HPC meet?
When needed.
Okay.
So.
Other questions for Mr. Adler? Okay, so I'm going to open it up to public comment now. So is there anyone who would like to be heard on this matter? If there is anyone here, please raise your hand. Come on up.
Morning, President Belinsky. Board, my name is Tim Horton. I live at 521 Elmwood in Wilmette. I live there with my wife, Megan, who grew up at 509 Forest. Her parents have lived there since, and then she also lived on Maple. We submitted a letter. Her family's lived in Wilmette since 1968. I've only been here since 2007. Really, she should be here, but she's at a middle school forum tonight for our son. What I encourage this board to do, and I can't speak to process. We renovated our house. It's a 1911 house several years ago, but it doesn't have this landmark status, so I can't speak to the process. What I can speak to is Dan and Tiffany Neely's dedication to preserving a historic home. And I can vouch for their credibility as I stand here right now. I lived through this process with them for 4 years. We're very good friends. I know they tried to do the very best for this home. And what they tried to do was preserve a historic home in Wilmette. And I think as I walk my dog every day around that house and I see the process that they've gone through, this was a tremendous renovation to this home. We've been in it before, we're in it now. They did a wonderful job. Apparently levity is not something we go for here, but if you've seen the movie The Money Pit with Tom Hanks and Shelley Long, I often joked with them that this is the money pit, but what they got was a magnificent renovation at the end of this process. So I can't speak to the process of whether every single step was followed as it should have been, but what I can speak to is their dedication to preserving a historic home in Wilmette. And I would urge this board to use something we don't have very often in public discourse today: common sense. What is the common sense thing to do? These people poured time and money and effort into rehabbing a historic home. When you walk around and what you see is people tearing down homes, because it's easier to tear down and build something new than to do what Tiffany and Dan Neely did, which was to preserve a historic home. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Was there another hand I saw back? Okay, sir. There aren't a lot of you. If you wanted, you can just line up. And I should mention, everybody gets 3 minutes. I don't expect anybody to go over, but you never know.
I'm here on behalf of the Neelys in favor of what they've done. My name's Mike Cagney, live in Wilmette. Since 2014, with my wife and 4 kids, my dad grew up in Wilmette. His mother grew up in Wilmette, went to St. Francis. My mother's father owned the former Smithfield Foods over on Wilmette Avenue, and now my uncle, when he built his bank, he put the bank there. So Wilmette means a lot to us. And the thing that I would consider as a board voting on this matter is, the people of Wilmette make Wilmette great. It's not the buildings. We appreciate what the HPC does in preserving these buildings and making sure the infrastructure has a history to it, but it's the people that make it great. The Neelys didn't have to live here. They're not from here. They chose to live here. And I think we run the risk as a village of alienating people like the Neelys in these type of situations if it goes the wrong way. Dan kind of alluded to it earlier, where they didn't have to do this, and it is a worry for these buildings that if people don't come along who are willing to take on these projects, that a lot of these buildings could go away over time or could deteriorate to a point where there's nothing to do. So I would definitely hope and recommend that you guys as trustees of the village take that in consideration and not set any sort of precedents and alienating people who are willing to put in the time and effort they put into this project. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Is there one more back there? Oh, 2 more. Okay. Welcome.
Good evening. Thank you for having us. My name is Mary Gillard Anderson. I'm here in support of the Neelys as well. I was born and raised in Wilmette, along with my 4 siblings. My parents have lived here for almost 50 years. My husband and 3 children and I decided to move back from the city about 4 years ago to Wilmette for many reasons, and we are so thrilled that we did. And there are many things that our family, and I know many others, value and love about Wilmette. I could go on and on. But one of the most special things, I think, are the beautiful homes. They're not cookie cutter, and so many residents take such pride and care in maintaining these homes. And I think that homes that have the landmark status are a particular treasure in a place like Wilmette. And I can personally say, just from living here most of my life, my dad has been a real estate broker in Wilmette for over 40 years. So I can say with certainty that it's a unique and special family that's willing and able to expend the resources, the time, and the energy to not only buy these homes, but then to maintain them and update them and preserve them. And I can personally say that Dan, Tiffany, Neely, and their 3 children fall into that very rare bucket. My husband and I have personally watched all of the, in awe, really, because I wouldn't have no patience for it. But all of the amount of meticulous research and time and planning that they've put into the interior and the exterior of the home. No detail was left uncovered, and it's truly remarkable, as Tim and Mike have said before. And so, I would just ask everyone, I think that Tim said it the best, to, hopefully use common sense here. Again, was every I dotted? Maybe not. But I, personally can vouch for the credibility of Dan and Tiffany, and, I would hate for a decision with respect to their beautiful home, to deter other people, because again, it's a rare breed that's able and willing to do this, from buying these homes as opposed to, buying something in Wilmette and tearing it down. And I've driven by that home been driven by the home, driven myself thousands of times over the last 40 years. And I can say that it looks more beautiful and well cared for than it ever has. And so thank you for your consideration and allowing us to give our input tonight. We appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Good evening, President and trustees. My name is Peter Corey. I'm here in support of the Neelys as well. I grew up in Wilmette, was born in Wilmette. My family's lived in Wilmette for over 50, 60 years. I grew up in a house that was 85 years old, and I now bought a house that was built in 1914, according to my wife. So very familiar with the historic qualities of Wilmette and the architecture and how important that is to Wilmette. A lot of what I'm going to say has already been referenced or directly said, but what the Neelys have done, I think, is evident to anyone that knows this house and has been by the house and saw what the house looked like a few years ago and what it looks like now. It's transformed from what was, in my opinion, a blight on the neighborhood, the way it looked, the way the porch looked, and now it's beautiful. The back porch is much more representative of the way a house would have looked in the turn of the century than what was on there, which was, I did not know that it was put on in 1990 until tonight, but it makes sense. So they've already put in tremendous time, effort, money. It's really a labor of love to improve the house as much as they have. I think it's important to the village, to the HPC, it's in everyone's interest to encourage this type of activity. As many people have said, what's happening now is homes are being torn down and rebuilt. It's easier, it's usually more profitable, but it doesn't help preserve the history of Wilmette. And I would just ask the village or the board to consider, we want to encourage more of this and not discourage people from doing this. Again, what Tim and what Mary have said, I think judging all that and using common sense is in everyone's best interest. The village, the board, the people, and future residents. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, sure. Welcome.
Thank you. My name is Catherine Barton. I live at 1720 Walnut Avenue, and my husband wrote in a letter on behalf of the Neelys. I used to be a neighbor around the corner of theirs. I was at 3rd and Isabella. So I've admired this home for a long time. And when I was looking to move, the house was not at the time for sale, but it certainly is eye-catching, and trying to anticipate what it would take to make it and bring it up to speed to where it is in 2019 was something our family was not able to do. But knowing the Neelys and the time and effort that they've put into this home, the home that we live in on Walnut was built in 1893. I think there's so much value in historic homes in Wilmette. It's what brings us here, that everything does not look exactly alike. And in all of the blocks, as everyone has said, with all of the homes being torn down so quickly, again, encouraging people to go through this process. So I would just ask that, you take the Neelys into consideration and then encourage other people to preserve these wonderful homes that we have. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Nope.
Thank you for having us. I'm Amy Donovan. I'm new to Wilmette. I'm at 531 Linden, and we love it here. I'm here on behalf of the Neelys. They are two of the nicest people you will ever meet. They've been incredibly welcoming to us. I found out from my mother that my grandparents attended dinner parties in their home many years ago. And it was a real treat for me to be able to go back to their home and walk through it and see and be where my grandparents have been. And when my husband and I were looking for homes, I would look at a home that was very old and needed a lot of work, and I thought, I'm not doing this. This is not for me. And the fact that the Neelys has spent the time and the effort and the love and the money to do what they've done, I feel like we should be thanking them more than anything. So, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, anyone else? All right, so I'll close public comment. Applicant, is there anything else you'd like to add? Okay. Are there any further questions for the applicant or for Mr. Adler or any member of the staff? Okay.
Just one question.
Yeah.
If any of the three motions, what they've done,
We could,
take away from the historical side of the house, or the certification? It does.
The roof over the front porch.
So they will lose the historical status if they keep the metal roof?
Oh,
no, they can't lose, no, Mr. Adler, come up here. That's an interesting question, because I had asked this question as well.
Right.
So,
Sorry, I misunderstood.
you can't, matter of fact, you can't revoke, they can't ask to be removed. Once you're on, you're sort of on.
Right.
And they won't lose it. What they'll have to do is they'll have to change it so that it's in conformance. They'll have to get a certificate of appropriateness, do whatever work. Now, the HPC has said that their work was okay, so I don't know, Mr. Adler, would be the village board then that would have to say what's okay?
Because, yeah, you're going down the HPC said it, but,
You turn your mic on.
sorry. I don't want people hearing me cough all night. Our director has said, had the issue with the roof. I mean, that's really is the only letter I've seen. So what outweighs, who outweighs who? Does that make?
Well, no, I guess that's a process question. So the HPC has recommended to the village board that we grant a certificate of appropriateness, right? And if we don't grant that certificate of appropriateness, presumably in our comments, there will be the reason for that. And presumably we have to clarify that we would grant the certificate of appropriateness if they did this, because otherwise either the staff, the applicant, and the HPC for that matter are sort of in the dark as to what our opinions were. Is that?
Yeah,
In the event that we say no,
Right.
we sort of have to say why and what needs to be done and direct the staff to work with the applicant to get it back to that.
Correct.
To
And
do that.
And I think this is a little bit different than usually when you have variation cases and you have multiple variations for an addition, we don't break out the variations independently because it doesn't make sense to. In this case, it did make sense to. You could choose to reaffirm grant the.
Right, and by the way, I'm happy if the trustees want to separate this into 3 votes, I'm happy to do that as well, and that, so.
And that's why the Preservation Commission did that, because, ultimately, all 3 modifications were approved, but you could have had one of the requested modifications recommended for denial, but it didn't make sense then to require all of the changes to be, removed from the structure if they ultimately were okay with, say, 2 of 3, or in this case, if the village board's okay with them all, or 1 of them or 2 of them, it's best to probably look at it in that fashion.
So, my question is, if we're going into the minutia of deciding round windows, spindle columns, I think we've talked a lot about the roof, and Kathy Hutsey-Arnston spoke a little bit about that, but, I mean, I don't know that I have enough information about the round windows, like what was original to the house. I don't know if I have enough information about the
I don't know if
specific
this is
spindles.
helpful, but given the new information, staff's original concerns have been, the original concerns are definitely lessened now that we know that there wasn't a window on that north side. So if that helps from a staff point of view.
Right, relating to the window.
Related to the window. And I think when it relates to the side porch, it's new. Arguably, one could look at, again, Secretary of Interior Standard 9. You could look at it and you could interpret that as the column should be round, or you could interpret that because it's an addition to it, the fact that it's slightly different is something that we don't necessarily have to concern ourselves with, this isn't this isn't a removal of a historic feature of the existing home. They didn't take an historic porch and remove a historic porch to put this up. They took a porch that was put up in the 1990s to put up a porch that's now was put up in 2017. So in the report, again, it's a design choice. Would my design choice been square columns? Maybe not, but again, I think you could look at that standard and you could come down on either side of it. You could come down on feeling that it's the character that you want to. So I guess what I'm saying is I wouldn't necessarily worry about it or concern myself too much about those two particular parts of the request.
Yeah, the only concern that's really been raised is the material on the roof. That's the concern that was raised by the director of the historical museum.
Right, and we could even go more specific and say the material on the front porch, the front roof, the one that is a part of the structure that's been there a long time.
Right, the difference being that the new porch is a new porch. And how you choose to, there's nothing historically significant about something that didn't exist. The old porch it did exist, so you can apply the standards and decide whether or not that it was an architectural feature, a historic material, or a distinctive architectural feature. And the standards relate to that, and you can make the decision whether you think that applied or whether you think standard 9, where you can do some contemporary things in your alteration, basically if you don't wreck it, whether that applies. And that's sort of the debate here, isn't it? Like, is the roof material historic material that needs to be protected under standard 2, or does the roof material fall under standard 9 for contemporary design for alterations shall not be discouraged when it basically doesn't destroy something that was historical in the first place? I mean, in my mind, that's sort of the debate between these standards here.
I guess I would point out that when it comes to the front roof, front porch roof, 6 is probably closest to what it is because it's a deteriorated feature, which they didn't replace, but repaired it with a different material.
Well, I guess the question is a shingle an architectural feature?
Well,
I think the front porch is
the front porch is
the
an architectural feature, but is a shingle. That's,
Well, it says the new material should match the material being replaced.
Again, this relates to an architectural feature.
Right.
And that's the question, is in my mind, the question, and it's a question that all of you can answer individually, is the material choice on the roof part of an architectural feature, or is it the pitch of the roof and the shape of the porch and everything else? That is a question that everybody can decide on their own, whether that is what's the phrase? Architectural feature. And again, if you read it all, fundamentally, that's what it comes down to. Is that a feature, or does it fall? Does 2 or 6 apply, or does 9 apply? Like, that's your choice, basically. If you think 2 and 6, that these are architectural features or historic materials, then that's one way of looking at it. Or if you think 9 applies, where it's a contemporary design that does not destroy significant historical, architectural, cultural material. So, but everybody gets to make up their mind on their own, and there's 7 of us, so.
So the only question I have back to John Adler and all of you is, in addition to the question around the material on the porch, on the front porch, if I look at the picture so I'm going back to the side porch and the spindles, if I look back at the picture from 1905, it's on page 8 of the material that was passed out. I think it's showing a front porch and a back porch, and those front porch and back porch, they match each other, in terms of design. And so not 11, because again, I agree with obviously, nobody's debating that the home looks beautiful. Nobody's debating that the changes that were made look beautiful. What we're debating is that this is a home that's a landmark status that is to look like the original home. That's really what we're debating here.
But that's not the standard.
Not the standards.
The standards are the standards the standards are the standards that are on the page. They're not, it has to look exactly like it used to look. That's not the standard. The standards are 2, 6, and 9.
Correct, but 2, 6, and 9, for example, 6 says that in the event replacement is necessary, the new material should match the material being replaced in position, color, design, texture, blah. And
Right,
so,
but again, related to deteriorated architectural features.
Right.
That's the question, is the roof, are the shingles, or is it the pitch of the roof, the shape of the porch and everything? What's the distinctive architectural feature? Everybody can decide that for their own, for themselves.
Yeah,
But the standard is not, it needs to look like it used to look. That's not what the standard says.
I'm actually not talking specifically, President Belinsky, about the front porch. I'm talking about the wraparound porch relative to look and feel relative to the front porch. So I'm telling you, there's actually 3 things in front of us, right? The roof material, the round windows, and the round versus square pillars on the side porch. And I was just asking a question about, because I felt like we were already off the round windows, I guess just, and I felt like maybe we were already off the round columns on the side porch. And I was just asking a question about the fact that if the picture on page 8 shows the columns on the porches matching.
A different porch, right.
A different porch,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
And why we don't feel that is an why do we not feel that that's a architectural feature that should be preserved? That's what I'm asking.
But it doesn't exist anymore, that porch that you're looking at. There's no preserving that porch. It doesn't exist. Right?
Right.
So I think that's what you're saying is, I think, different than the standards, which is, why didn't we make them replicate the porch in the same style?
Okay, so if they were doing I'm just asking, I guess, a clarifying question. If they were doing the exact same porch, we would have, but because it's a totally different porch, it wasn't there, the design features don't need to match. Maybe that's the question I'm asking you, John.
I don't know if I would, I think that is even up.
It's a question.
Right, it's a question. But I do think that the fact that, if the porch, if that porch was removed, or that porch fell into disrepair, absolutely we would want that porch to be replicated as closely as it could be, because that's from 1905. The porch in question, the porch that was removed, was from 1990 or so, and so that we lose that concern. So that's when Standard 9 tends to kick in. I think you could look at Standard 9 and reasonable people could decide that the porch with square columns ultimately meets the standard. I think somebody, and I think there were probably members of the HPC, a couple of members of the HPC might think that the character and the material on the addition is in conflict with the property. You could, that I think also, a lot of this is how one chooses to look at it. This isn't as simple as saying this is conforming or not, and that's why.
Right. This isn't a zoning case.
This right.
It's not like,
this
okay,
design.
It's supposed to be, the setback's 10 feet and it's
Right.
9. Okay, you're off by a foot.
Right. And ultimately, that's what happened at the HPC. We had a couple of members when it came to the columns who had a concern, and then you had 4 members who felt that it ultimately was meeting that standard. Now, in the future, we'll go into a little bit more detail with them about how they're looking at these standards. So,
Right, and that can be actually debated in front of the HPC and say, you know what, we came in with round and we decided we want to do square. I know because we were specific and we said round, do you guys care if we do square?
Right.
So.
I think the HPC can also be a resource to owners of landmark homes. I remember, I'm not an architect, but there were a lot of architects that, could help you, like, replicate things, get the right windows, design. It can be very specific, and the HPC can be a very good resource to homeowners as well as, just the community. And people who have older homes, what can I do? You know, how can I preserve this?
Right.
Well, that's part of the benefit of the Historic Preservation Awards. You sort of have created this community of people that are focused on it that can be a resource. Like, if you want to find an architect that knows how to do this stuff, well, all you can do is look at the HPC awards and see who won the awards recently, you know?
And that's the intent of the process. The intent of the process is you come in relatively early on the process. And in 2017, they did. They came in early on the process. And, you know, you look to the HPC to help, you know, with the design and hopefully something that ultimately is in keeping with the character of the structure.
Okay, so other questions for Mr. Adler? I'm going to ask just one more, which I think Trustee Sullivan sort of mentioned, but you know, in the event that we, and I will split them into 3 votes to replicate the 3 votes, and we're not voting yet. We're going to have discussion. Don't worry. I'm not rushing to the question yet. In the event that one of the 3 is voted down, the round windows is sort of an easy, you know what the fix is. I mean, I think it will be self-evident, but in essence, the process thereafter would be that the staff would work with the applicant to, you know, remedy the issues that the board has and make the changes, in essence. That would be the requirement. Okay. All right, so any more questions for Mr. Adler? If there aren't, I'll move on to discussion. Okay. Trustee Plunkett, you were on the HPC. I'd be interested, if you wouldn't mind going first, I'd be interested in hearing your point of view on it.
Yeah, this is very difficult. I think when I first heard this, I was pretty upset because this is not just any landmark home. This is one of, you know, the most important homes in Wilmette, and it's a treasure. And I think that the HPC, I don't think the process is burdensome at all. I think the process can be very helpful to a homeowner. And I think that, you know, the HPC can help with materials choices and decisions. It was difficult to see from the transcript how much detail was gotten into here. So I don't think this should be, this discussion here should discourage other residents from landmarking their homes, because, you know, if you look at what the HPC did in 2017, they looked at these requests and they really granted everything that the homeowners wanted to do. Of course, I would laud the homeowners for restoring this wonderful home and for making sure that the home lasts, because you know, even though you're not allowed to tear a home down if it's locally landmarked, it can fall into such disrepair that may become necessary. So this is a very difficult case. I think the metal roof is not consistent with the Queen Anne home. The one thing that I would say to counter that, however, is that, you know, roofing material is temporary and that can be changed. And originally, if these were cedar shingles, the asphalt shingle was not original either. So I am torn on that. I am torn on, I don't know. I would love to see this replicated, but I know replicated is not the same as preserved. So, you know, in those situations where, you know, additions had made that were not original to the home, I understand. So I'm a little torn on the roof, but the one mitigating factor for that is that roofing material is temporary. Eventually that roof is going to have to be replaced. And I would just say in the future, I think it's, you know, this was a difficult situation for the HPC to handle. It's difficult for us to handle when people come in here and do things without a permit.
And we're used to it.
And we're more used to it. And I can say that they've never had this situation before. And so, you know, just because they granted everything, I do feel that, I wonder if this discussion had been had beforehand, maybe some kind of compromise on certain things could have been made.
Trustee Barrow?
I would say, I guess, a couple of things. The confusion or the errors that got us here tonight notwithstanding, I think we and the village owe the Neelys a thank you for the work that they've done on this home. These homes are rare. There aren't 3 dozen of them, apparently, in the village, and they're a link to a time that's no more. And when they're gone, they're gone. And so that folks that undertake to buy them and renovate them and live in them are really doing something in trust for not just the folks that live here today, but future residents of Wilmette will also benefit. I'm troubled by the process that has taken place here, and candidly, I think that the HPC may share in some of the confusion that has brought us here today. Certainly, I would have expected that the Neelys and their experienced architect would have handled this differently, but here we are. And when I look at these standards, none of them are immediately self-executing. I think you can make a case for keeping the property as it currently stands or requiring changes for it. When all is said and done, and certainly not being an expert in this area, I really defer to the HPC on this, and I'm prepared to support all 3 of the changes. So, thank you.
Trustee Dodd, you made eye contact first. You have to look away if you don't want to talk. So like being in school, right?
I do want to echo what Trustee Barrow said and say thank you to the applicant for doing this. And thank you for all of you for speaking on behalf of how important these older homes are to us and how important they are to our community. I happen to also live in a very old home that was built in the early 1900s, so I can appreciate the time that is spent trying to just maintain a home like that. And I would like to echo what Trustee Plunkett said, which is that we do want more people to restore their homes, and we do, and the HPC can be a huge help in that process, so I would encourage all residents to be doing that. I've driven past your home about 3 times today. You've seen my car. And, you know, it clearly you've done a beautiful job, and I commend you on that, you know. And this is a difficult one, and I am struggling because it is a beautiful home, but we are, you know, obviously, as a landmark home, things are you're more limited in what you can do. That said, I guess I can for sure support keeping the square windows. And I appreciate, John, you helping me and others on this question I had about the side porch. Clearly, I'm not, this HPC process is new to me, so thank you. And so given the explanation from John and others, I can support that they keep the square pillars or not round pillars. And then I'd be interested in other trustees' perspective on the roof and kind of the questions you were asking. I would probably feel comfortable only asking them to change the front porch and not the side porch roof, because that to me is what's most visible. You know, I think that's what's most visible, and when you're driving and things like that. I don't know how the applicant's going to feel about that. So, but that's where I stand. I do want to actually also say one thing, which is I want to thank Trustee Kennedy for bringing this to our attention. I think we've all learned something, and it was on an agenda where we had lots of things on the agenda. So, and I know we've talked to John about just the process. So, thank you for dealing with us with this process. I think we've all learned something, the staff, the HPC, and so it will help others in the as we go forward, and I hope you know that we've heard your feedback and we'll respect that going forward. So thank you.
Kennedy?
You next, okay. I don't want to just repeat whatever the people said about the need and to restore and preserve the older homes, particularly the ones that are landmarked. And I really admire anyone who takes that on as a project, because it is not an easy thing to do. I don't live in a 100-year-old home, but it's 80 years old, and that takes a lot of work. So I can only imagine what it's like if it's more ancient than that. And I think that preserving the homes that we have in this village is preserving our past and our history, and it tells all of us where we came from, which is incredibly important. That said, I think that the Historic Preservation Committee process should be respected. I'm sorry that it wasn't in this case, because I think it's just caused a lot of grief to a lot of people. And I think that we can try to do our best to make the process easier and better understood, and make sure that everyone going into this understands what they're supposed to do. But that still leaves us with the decision of what to do in this case. To my thinking, the windows are easy, the easiest part, because unlike what you knew when you went into the HPC in the first place, we now know that the window wasn't round, that there wasn't an original round window, at least on one side of the house. So I think that's easy to say that we don't need to have that changed. As far as the roof is concerned, I would distinguish the roof like Kathy Dodd. I would distinguish Trustee Dodd. I'm not used to that yet. I would distinguish between the roof on the porch, which is a separate architectural piece that is completely new to the house. There was never a wraparound porch on that house. So I would set that aside. But the front porch was an existing feature. It has been in more or less the same condition or sort of appearance since the beginning. The original columns were a little more elaborate, but little else has changed about that until the metal roof went on. And that metal roof, to me, stands out as something that's very different from the intact front view of the house, and changes the character quite a bit more. And when I look at Section 6, I know that President Belinsky said we all have to read that differently. I would read the deteriorated architectural feature at issue here as the porch, not any particular material, but the porch itself is the architectural feature. And in that case, 6 dictates that it be replaced whenever possible, repaired whenever possible, and replaced when necessary with new material that matches that being replaced in position, design, color, texture, and other visual qualities. So I would very much like to see that front porch restored to a shingled roof. As far as that wraparound porch goes, I like the original design. I think it would have been more consistent with the sort of style, but I don't think that's required by our standards. So I wouldn't probably recommend that we insist on changes to the porch at all.
Okay. Trustee Kurzman? I caught you writing.
Yeah, thank you. There's nothing clear-cut about this, and I've been challenged with it. This is my first exposure on the village board to a matter of nuts and bolts of historic preservation. So, we try to be quick studies to issues that come before us, but I honestly feel like this is HPC subject matter, and yet here we are. I break it down probably in 2 ways: to process and to the content and the subject matter. To the process, I think it's clear there's a breakdown. It has helped me to sort of maybe pay finer attention to the proceedings at the HPC, to learn that they approve almost everything that goes before it. It's just something I make a note of. I don't pass judgment on it, but
I will say one thing. I think Mr. Adler would confirm that applicants don't go into the HPC cold. There's lots of conversations with the staff in terms of massaging and iterating their proposals.
That too is helpful. So,
yeah.
My exposure to it has been limited, which gives me great appreciation for Trustee Plunkett's previous service on that group. So I do feel like there was a breakdown, but I think the applicant came forward and said so right away, acknowledged some accountability in that. So I do want to acknowledge that. And we don't always witness that when when folks come before the board in similar situations, especially for zoning matter. So I do think the process piece, I appreciated John Adler's perspective on, how we can sort of have a smoother process or more engaged process for these cases moving forward. But to the content, that's just not our expertise, except for perhaps Trustee Plunkett and others who may live in a historic home. I do not. And when it comes to the common sense element, as was raised by some of the speakers tonight, I guess, the roof piece, like even to me in my untrained eye, just my common sense on it is it doesn't feel historic. And so how do I not take that common sense into account? And so I see a lot of merit in what Trustees Dodd and Kennedy have spoken to in terms of that particular aspect to this. But, and so I'm still curious how you, Mr. President, and Trustee Sullivan speak on this because, I'm grappling with a lot of things, including that.
Trustee Sullivan?
I'm supportive of all three. I think, not to rehash everything, but my issue was initially the roof, but I think it's the porch. And I look at the porch, I think the material I can live with. I know it doesn't look historic, but I think it also goes in keeping with that. It rehabs it for this home for a longer period, and I think the applicant said it best. It's going to what he did rehabs this and puts it in a condition for the next 100 years. And so I think the untrained eye, for me, it looks at anybody that goes by it knows that house was here long before most of us were, and still will. And I think I can support all three.
Yeah, so it's a hard one when you have to balance the standards, and it's impossible. First off, Trustee Kennedy, you're absolutely right. They've done the work, and that influences our perspective on this. There's no question about that. But it's also not a matter of personal taste. We're not the taste police up here. We don't say what is and what isn't. There is the the ARC, that actually is part of their mandate, that, hey, you're going to do something in a commercial building downtown. Is it going to fit in? Is it going to look right? There actually is a taste element to that. But the standards of review here and for zoning, it's, the applicant chose to use this roofing material. They thought it was good for the home. They liked the look of it, obviously. They wouldn't have done something they didn't like in that respect. And so the question is really on the standards. And, going back, the windows, I think there's really little debate now on the windows because it's actually what they did was more historically accurate at the end of the day. With the side porch, look, you and I might have chosen to have the same columns. I probably would have, because that's just my personality. I like it all to be lined up and the same. But that's not everybody's approach to the world, and it is a new piece, and perhaps in the historic preservation world, you actually want the new piece to look a little bit like a new piece so that you don't confuse it. But again, that's a personal taste, and I don't disagree with those who say when you drive by, maybe the roof stands out a little bit more than one might like it to. But that said, I think that in the spirit of, and frankly the letter of the standards, I do think the standards are met, even if I might have done it a different way. And I might have said, you know what, I'd like to have that be shingles. And it's not the historical element. I just don't like the fact that they're two different ones. I couldn't live with that. But that's not what this is about. It's not about what I would prefer. So I'm going to support the three requests here. Any further discussion?
I do have one question. It's in my debate about the roof, and I noted that the Historic Preservation Commission, it seemed like they in part approved the roof because they realized that the material was, the temporary material, you can make changes to it. Does our approval now, what I'm trying to say is if the roof was done again, could they have to ask for another certificate of appropriateness to go to, just because that metal is on there now, I don't want the metal to be on there forever. The next time
I would
the roof
say
is changed.
if you grant a certificate of appropriateness, the certificate's going to be good for that material if work needs to be done in the future.
is there anything that we can do to say, you know, in the future, if you replace this roof, that you should replace it with a material that is more?
I believe you can, but I mean, the reality is the age on a standing seam roof, you know, people might be arguing you can't put shingles back up because it's been on the house for 70 years. So and I understand what you're saying, but I think you probably should have a level of
I believe that would be
comfort.
standard 4.
Yes, thank you.
Changes taking place in the
Right.
course of time are evidence
But
of history.
if like a tree fell on it 6 weeks from now, if we grant a certificate of appropriateness from this material on that roof in the front, I think, unless there is a condition placed on,
Correct.
we would honor it and tell them they could replace it with that material.
And but if they did change the material, so let's say they did decide to go back to a shingle 2 years from now, they would have to come back to us for a certificate of appropriateness to change it back.
Oddly, yes.
Yeah. Any sort of material renovation like that.
That can't be somehow put into the certificate? I mean,
No, I think
Like
we
a
could
condition, or-
we could put a condition that at such time the front porch roof needs to be replaced, it'll be replaced with shingles to match the main roof. I would think so.
Yeah, you can condition the certificate. I mean, this is the village board. You're authorized to do that.
You would have to accept.
I guess the question would be, what would that condition look like? Would it be, if you have to remove the metal roof, does it have to be replaced with a shingle material, or do they have to go back to the HPC? I think would probably be the latter. You would have to go back to the HPC, because we don't know 30, 40 years from now if you can, you know, maybe shingles no longer exist or something like that, right? So I would recommend, if you are going to put that condition, that the condition is simply that a metal roof can be placed on there. It can be repaired but cannot be replaced without going back to the HPC through the process.
Okay. Any more questions for Mr. Adler?
Mr. Stein, is that a separate motion within our motions? Is that?
It would be a separate vote on the third or the first element of the roof, and so
I guess
if you want it with a condition, that would be the vote, or if you just don't want a condition at all, that would be a separate vote.
I think we should sort of run through the same 3 that HPC, those are the 3 questions I will call, and then we'll see what the results are, and then we can talk about whether we need another motion. How does that sound? Okay. All right, any further conversation? I'll make sure everybody has a chance. All right, so let me go to the page, find this page. So there were 3 motions. I'll read the 3 motions and then we'll take them. The first motion was, and these are the motions that were made in HPC, to recommend approval of the changes to the porch roof material from shingles to metal, to recommend approval of the changes to the window and door openings as outlined in the staff report, and to recommend approval of changes to the porch columns as outlined in the staff report. So I'm going to go in reverse order. Then I don't have to flip the page back. So, and Mr. Stein, how do we manage this? So we just take them in the 3 and.
Yeah, so we have an overall arching motion to approve this, right? So you can take each element on its own right now, but I would do a vote after each one of those.
Yeah, of course. Okay, all right, so we have the motion, it's been seconded, we've had our discussion. There's 3 elements to that motion, and we'll take votes on each individually. Now do I need another motion?
You don't need another. This is overarching. It's similar to what we kind of did with Loyola. We're taking each element, going through it without a separate motion.
Okay, so I
unless
don't
there's a
need
condition now. There would
Right,
be a
that's
motion.
different. So, okay. So first we'll vote on, again, under, as Mr. Stein said, under Trustee Barrow's motion, we'll vote on approval of changes to the porch columns as outlined in the staff report. So the clerk, please call the roll on that.
Trustee Sullivan.
Aye.
Trustee Kennedy.
Aye.
Trustee Dodd.
Aye.
Trustee Kurzman.
Aye.
Trustee Barrow.
Aye.
Trustee Plunkett.
Aye.
President Polinsky.
Aye. Okay, so that, I wouldn't say the motion carries because it wasn't a motion. That element has carried. All right, so the second one is recommend approval of changes to the window and door openings as outlined in the staff report. Clerk, please call the roll.
Trustee Sullivan.
Aye.
Trustee Kennedy.
Aye.
Trustee Dodd.
Aye.
Trustee Kurzman.
Aye.
Trustee Barrow.
Aye.
Trustee Plunkett.
Aye.
President Polinsky.
Aye. Okay, so that element is also approved. And the final one is recommend approval of changes to the porch roof material from shingles to metal. Clerk, please call the roll.
Trustee Sullivan.
Aye.
Trustee Kennedy.
Definitely aye with respect to the wraparound porch. Not,
So you have to say.
Well,
not so sure about
I
the other.
can't record that.
so we can, if it fails, we'll come back with, to figure out what other elements are, how to modify this to get
Oh,
approval.
okay. So I just see, so if I said no, we can reconsider the element separately?
Yeah, depending on the
Okay.
vote. Yeah.
No.
No.
Trustee
No.
Kennedy, I have you as no then, right?
Yeah, no,
Okay.
sorry.
Trustee Dodd.
No.
Trustee Kurzman.
No.
Trustee Barrow.
Aye.
Trustee Plunkett.
No.
President Polinsky.
Aye. Okay, so that element fails. Trustee Kennedy's suggestion was limiting it to the wraparound porch is fine, the front porch is not. Trustee Plunkett had made a suggestion that if the roof, the front porch is replaced, repaired significantly or whatever, that it's not allowed to be replaced as a metal roof. Am I stating that correctly?
Yeah, that, I'm not making that motion, I just wanted to ask about that.
Well,
But
do-
I would throw that on the table. I mean, maybe we can have a discussion about that. I don't know. People think that's a crazy idea, and the problem is metal roofs do last a long time.
Well, yeah, and given the vote, if one of you has an idea that would swing you to a yes, then we have a majority of the board. Assuming that it doesn't offend Trustee Sullivan, Trustee Barrow, or myself, then we would have 4 votes. So the question is really, each of you individually, what it would take you to vote yes. And I believe Trustee Kennedy, in her comments, said, I'm okay with the wraparound being metal, but the front porch is not. And Trustee Dodd's nodding along as well. Okay, so that's their point of view. That, your point of view as well, but if there was something short of that, that you were interested in, you could certainly express it or not.
I guess I just kind of wanted to, does anybody else have a comment on that kind of a condition? I don't know.
But can I, so if I understand, so where we stand now is, didn't pass.
Right.
The roof. So we're saying that we're going to, the options are, they require to rip off all the metal and replace it with shingle. I don't know, we could, if you amend it and say rip off
Yeah, I
the
don't
front
think-
and not the side.
I think
or
that's
put a
what Trustee
condition on it.
Kennedy and Trustee
Yeah.
Dodd are saying, that they don't care about the side porch, they just want the front porch
Replace.
maybe we
So I
should-
think, could you split that off and say, could you make a motion and say, this is what we want to do on the
Yeah,
roof?
right, but that's exactly where I'm going.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
it was my sense that Trustee Plunkett's condition was less burdensome
To the
potentially on the applicant. So if that is something, and again, unfortunately, it matters only to each of the individuals, if that's enough. And
But Trustee
Curzon certainly-
Plunkett's recommendation would be on both the side porch and the front porch, right? And so I think, in terms of burdensome, I'm just wondering if we should make a motion to approve, I don't know, was yours only going to be on the front porch,
Well,
Trustee
I mean,
Plunkett?
that's obviously what's, most visible. I
But her
think what I
point is that they wouldn't have to take action today. It would only be in the
Right,
event
no,
that it
yeah,
was replaced.
In the event that's replaced. I think what I based
But
mine on was the Historic Preservation's Commission's comments that the roofing material was temporary. But if we grant this, and now the certificate of appropriateness is that the metal roof is forever appropriate, that takes away the temporary notion of this. So I guess my point was, I would like to see this restored someday to a shingle-style roof if those materials are available.
So in essence, what you're saying, let me try and paraphrase it. The applicant sort of gets a pass for now, but we're not cementing it in stone. As a matter of fact, we're saying the opposite, that in essence, it's only appropriate as long as it's the current roof, and thereafter, it will have to be restored to a shingle roof.
That's what I'm suggesting. It's a tough one, because I'm torn, and, you know, I'm always usually lenient when it comes to applicants, but that's what I'm going to suggest on this one.
But are you going to suggest that, Trustee Plunkett, on the side porch and the front porch?
Well, if
Or
the
just
side
the front porch?
roof-
Or both? That's what I'm just trying to understand. Because I was just trying to make it easy for the applicant, which is, I think if we were to make if we were to take the item and approve the metal roofing on the side porch, I think that would get approval.
It would, that's clear. But
It
if-
would. I think it would look strange to have metal roofing on the side porch. I guess that would be a design decision that the applicant could make at the time.
I just want to see why you're suggesting the other. Okay.
Okay.
I just don't want this metal roof to become the new normal for this house.
Right.
That's my concern, that this now becomes what this house should be.
So, all right, let me call up the applicant here for a second. So, it appears, and it's not, it appears that you have a majority of the board that would say you can keep the metal roof on the side, you have to change it on the front. You may also have a majority of the board that says you can keep your metal roof on both, but if you replace those roofs, they should be replaced with shingles. Do you have a preference between those two alternatives?
I would have a slight modification to the second one, which is my preference. The second one is that it should have to go through HPC. The reason for that is if let's say at some point we have to replace the main roof of the house, I mean, there were comments made about it matching the top roof and the metal roof, and so at some point you don't want 3 roofing materials on the house, I wouldn't think.
That's actually easier, isn't it?
So I think if you-
It's easier, then the condition is that any change to
The roofing
roof,
materials.
any
Okay.
change to the roof material has to go, including retaining it,
Okay.
has to go back through
Go
HPC.
back to the HPC.
Right, and
would be-
that's kind of, I mean, that's what I recommended, because you don't necessarily want to know if shingles are going to be around 30, 40 years from now. So that would be putting them back into the process, which they would have to go through anyway if they wanted to change another element of
Yeah,
the roof.
I'm not,
Of the
I think that
portion.
that would be the case in any event.
No, but that's what I was worried about, because they said if it's a metal now, then that becomes a new certificate
Right,
of
so they could
appropriateness.
replace it like for like.
Right.
Like for like.
But I
okay.
just think
She's saying-
if you
She's
put-
saying no.
if the
She's saying
condition is
no
that you-
replace like for like.
Repair,
If you have to change that
If you
porch,
do something
repair
to the
that
front
porch,
porch roof,
whatever.
it should have to go to
Even
HPC.
like for like, it has to go back to HPC.
But the main roof, if they wanted to change the main roof
Would
back
be
to
HPC.
metal, they have to go to HPC anyway now,
Right.
because that wasn't part of this.
Right, but the whole like for like thing, Trustee Plunkett says, no like for like. In essence, I'm not going to make you change it now, but I don't want this set in stone that this is going to be metal forever.
That's my compromise.
Okay. All right, so with the way,
So right now you have a motion that's partially granted, partially denied. You are asking to add a condition to the third element of the motion.
so let me first confirm that if we made
Yes.
that modification, so in essence, go through the same process. So it would be, where did it go? Recommending approval of changes to the porch roof material from shingles to metal with the condition that if there's any material repairs made to the porches, that they would have to go back to HPC regarding the material of the roof, regardless if it's the same material.
And I would say replacement instead of repair, right? That's what we're talking about.
Okay, replacement, okay. All right, so let's, would the clerk call the roll on that provision for this motion, and then we'll go back and fix the
Well, so
motion if
that-
it passed?
Well, I
Or
think
should we
that
just amend the
requires a
motion?
separate motion and
That's
second.
a separate motion. This would be a separate motion because now you're conditioning the original.
All right, well, let's just amend, can we amend the
Yeah,
motion?
absolutely.
All right, so, Trustee Barrow, would you, are you, you're the original move-in? Okay, so you know what was said, and he's okay. Who is the second?
The second was Trustee Dodd. If you agree to the amendment, then it doesn't require a separate vote.
And if you don't agree, then we'll vote.
What doesn't require a separate motion?
No.
Okay, all right, so then Trustee Barrow withdraws his first motion and makes a new motion?
Well, no, we still have a motion. We have a motion that's been partially granted and partially denied. That's done. Now will be a second motion with the condition. So the motion to approve the roof,
Okay.
as you described it, with the condition that it shall not be replaced.
All right.
And then we need a new second, and that's a vote on that.
So, but have we voted on the original motion? We voted in pieces, and that's okay?
It's partially granted, partially denied right now.
Okay,
So
all right.
so 2 and 3 are approved.
So trustee Barrow, we now need a motion from you to approve the element of the roof material with the condition that we've described, that any replacement of that roof, even like for like, needs to go back to the Historic Preservation Commission.
Can I say so moved?
Yes.
Yes, you can.
Is there a second?
So,
Second.
Okay, so it's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? All right, would the clerk please call the roll?
Trustee Sullivan?
Aye.
Trustee Kennedy?
No.
Trustee Dodd?
No.
Trustee Kurzman?
Aye.
Trustee Barrow?
aye.
Trustee Plunkett?
Aye.
President Belinsky?
Aye. Okay, so that carries.
Yep.
So in essence, we have two motions that were approved.
Yes.
One got the first two, and that one got the last one.
Correct.
Okay. And I think we're done.
Procedural circus, but it's done.
That's why you always have to have a lawyer standing next to you, or sitting next to you. Okay, so trustee Barrow, I am back to you with the Land Use Committee.
No further matters to report.
And now we're on the Finance Committee with trustee Kennedy.
I would like to introduce Ms. Berger.
I'm going to,
You're going to do it? Okay. Mr. Michael Raymond is going to do it. The supplemental presentation on the annual road program.
all right, so while John pulls that up, at our last board meeting, we had a long discussion on our road program funding needs. And there were questions at the time about financial impacts to the budget and to our taxpayers. And subsequent to that meeting, there were some follow-up questions from board members about the impact to our tax levy. So this really isn't intended for discussion tonight. This is more for presentation purposes so that trustees have some time to think over the impacts of our scenarios that we laid out and put our discussion on September 16th into some context as we prepare for that meeting on Monday. So this first slide here just shows you the various scenarios we walked through on increasing our road program funding at our August 27th meeting and what it would mean to our property tax levy. So just really briefly, just to give you an explanation of one of these rows, scenario 2 would increase our annual funding level to $2.3 million, which is a $450,000 increase from where we're at now. That would require an additional increase to the tax levy of 2.43%. So that's how we've worked through each of these scenarios here. On the bottom is an example if we were going to do a bond issue and repair all of our serious streets, which are the worst condition streets. That'd be about a $9.2 million bond issue. And between the additional annual funding we need and the debt service, it would be a 5.77% tax levy increase. So this next slide here, and this gets to, I think it was Trustee Sullivan's question at the last meeting, of there are a lot of moving pieces in next year's budget and a lot of anticipated increases. So to put some context into what we're talking about, this is what we project for the FY 2020 budget, and we're going to dig deeper into this at our September 16th meeting. That September 16th meeting is going to be focused on the road program, the water fund and rate, and the sewer fund and sewer rate. So we're already projecting a property tax increase of 4.9%, and you see what that means to the average residential tax bill. It's $90. If we were to take scenario 2, which is adding $450,000 to our road program, that's an additional $43 on the average property tax bill on top of that $90 we're already expecting. The water rate increase, 8 cents, that's a worst-case scenario. We're going to work that down as we get closer to our Monday meeting, and I'm hopeful that we may be able to hold the line on the water rate as we bring on North Main Utilities and we have some flexibility on the timing of some water main replacements.
How did you come up with the 8 cents?
8 cents is based on a model that the finance director has put together in terms of where our water fund reserve is going into the future and having a $1 million annual water main replacement program starting in 2021. So by pushing that replacement program back to 2023, we've bought ourselves some time, and we're doing a lot of main replacements this year and next year, which we'll talk about more on Monday.
When was the last time we raised the water rate?
We raised it this year for 2019. So we've raised it the last 2 years by 2.7% each year.
So 275, we did it.
We're at, actually, I've got Monday's presentation draft pulled up here in case the question came up. We are at 268 per unit right now. We were at 249 in 2014, and then went up to 261 in 2018, and then 268. So we've increased it the last 2 years. And the sewer rate is what we've held flat for the past 3 or 4 years.
And the sewer fee increase here, obviously the stormwater utility is related to the project.
Neighborhood storage project.
Yeah. So the sewer fee?
The sewer fee increase is it's a combination of water consumption being down and reducing the reserve, and we continue to do an ongoing capital that's basically been paid for out of the reserve, and that's bringing the reserve down. And that's going to be one of the discussion points on Monday is, here is all of our ongoing capital and our CIP recommendations. Here are some alternative lower budget ways to look at it and what it would mean for the rate. So we'll be able to dig deeper into that. So we're looking at a $402 projected increase just in 2020 based on all of our needs. And there's a note at the bottom right, that's just 2020, right? We anticipate the property tax levy to go up in 21. We know the stormwater utility fee is going up to a projected $430 by 2022. And as we work through the sewer fee increase in particular, that's probably not just a one-year increase to get us where we need to be on the sewer fund reserve, and that's largely attributed to the water usage and declining consumption. So we're going to have charts that show in detail how our reserves have been impacted with consumption, with expenditures, and we'll have some good background to help us make decisions.
And the 490 and the property tax, that includes the pensions and debt service?
Pensions, debt service, and general operating.
So it includes the new rolling amortization?
Correct.
And is the debt service going up next year, or is it?
Debt service actually ticks down a very small percent. If it's going up, it's nominal compared to the rest of it.
Okay.
Most of that property tax increase is driven by general operating because we're using reserves to offset much of the pension increase.
Mike, is this truly an average or a median?
The property tax increase is an average.
Yeah, even just any of them
Yeah,
with a 402, I'm just.
Yeah, they're a mix. The water rate and sewer are medians because when you use an average, your large users on the commercial side increase it more than it really is for a resident. So those are median. The property tax is residential average.
Did you get the slide? Do we have the slides?
It was sent out around 3:30 today, and they were dropped into your Good Reader app, so you'll have them for reference, and they'll be in our next presentation on Monday.
And there's one more slide.
All right, a job today.
So, general fund reserve. When we had started our budget discussions very early in the year, looking at the first quarter review, and the Finance Committee was reviewing our general fund reserve policy, we had hoped that there would be excess reserves that we could use for capital projects, specifically the roads. And as we know, our revenues aren't performing as well as we had hoped during the year, at least on the recurring side, and we do have some more expenditures than we anticipated. So this chart here is really intended to explain how our general fund reserve works and where we think that excess is going to be at the end of the year. So the total reserve is projected year to date. So this includes all the non-recurring permits we've gotten to date or that we anticipate getting in the next week. So this includes Artis over at Ridge Road, and it includes also a large residential permit extension that came in this week. So this is the most current reserve number we have. So we start out at almost $13.6 million in our general fund reserve, but then we start backing out various areas where we've already strategically committed to spend that down over time to reduce our reliance on future tax levy increases. So the SURF, you take $2.2 million out of that reserve because that's set aside for future vehicle and equipment needs. And the board may recall that SURF was created several years ago when we started having a lot of non-recurring permits, and we wanted to make sure we were spending that money down on one-time capital needs, and that was the intent of the creation of the SURF. The pension drawdown, we had talked just a few minutes ago about the 15-year rolling amortization that we're transitioning to for pensions. We're going to be pulling at least $1.25 million out of reserves over the next 3 years. So this is a 3-year reserve drawdown for for the pensions to offset the property tax levy increase. It's very likely that this amount from reserves will increase if we don't hit our assumed rate of return in the pension funds. We may need to pull a little bit more out to soften that property tax levy impact over time. 1225 Central Avenue property, almost probably a decade ago, maybe a little less, we had purchased 1225 Central for future potential redevelopment or for a public purpose like a parking garage or a parking lot. So this is not cash that we have sitting in reserve. It's in land, and we use the reserve to purchase that. And we just want the board to keep that in mind, that as we potentially could move towards some type of redevelopment or public use, that full $630,000 may not be replenished to the reserve. So when we're thinking about how much money we have in excess, that should be a consideration in our discussions. And then we've talked about, I believe it was at our mid-year financial review when we talked about the CIP, and at our last meeting, the need to update our comprehensive plan. So we know we need to fund that out of the general fund reserve. There's really no other way to do that, and that would be about $200,000. So when you back all that out of our top line reserve, we're at a projected $9.3 million. And on the right side, you'll see our proposed reserve policy that the Finance Committee discussed and the board reviewed but didn't approve yet, shows a trigger level of about $9.65 million. So if all things held steady, we wouldn't necessarily have that excess reserve to spend on capital next year. One thing that's kind of asterisk on this slide here is that this doesn't account for any reduction in the $1 million budgeted water fund transfer. So we know the water fund is not performing well given reduced consumption. In years past, we've reduced the amount of transfer from $1 million, either $900,000 or $950,000. As Melinda and I work through it, we think that reduction could be fairly significant for the end of this year into next year. And we'll work through that a little bit more on Monday's Committee of the Whole and at our budget workshop in October. So we don't have to make that decision right away, but that's just going to further reduce that projected operating reserve that's really available for us to spend. So this is just background as we're considering what to do with our road program and how to address the need. You know, I don't think the problem's solved through the general fund reserve, and obviously there's some significant impacts to the tax levy depending on the option we select. Tax levy is not the only option. There are other revenue alternatives we can explore. And while we're not going to get into revenue alternatives at Monday's meeting on roads and water and sewer, we do have another Committee of the Whole meeting on September 23rd when we're talking about the stormwater utility. And if there's a need to continue the road program discussion, we'll have time at that meeting as well. So this is a lot of information in a short period of time.
Yeah, and it's intended to just get the concepts in your head before we all sit down on the 16th to talk about it. Because, you know, the first budget's complicated enough of a process, so.
And we do have a little bit of good news. As our engineering department has continued our quality control checks on our PCI condition ratings, and actually our village engineer and our Ryan, who did the presentation last meeting, have actually gone out and looked at some of the roads that have degraded most significantly from 2016 to now. We're finding that the interns on some of them may have been a little bit too tough on the rating. So we're going to see a small uptick in the PCI. We had talked about being at 56, which was on the borderline of fair and poor. Maybe we get up to 59 or 60. So it's not going to solve all of our problems, but it makes things a little bit better, and it's given us.
It doesn't make them better. It's just that
it doesn't change. It doesn't change a road.
No, it may not be as worse as we think, as you guys suggested it was the last time. On average, so it doesn't fix any single roads though.
So when you get your meeting materials on Friday, you'll see the slides. Will have a little bit of an uptick of where we're starting from.
We probably have no need to send a press release to any specific street to let them know that the road is not a 59, but it's a 62, so they feel better about it, right?
Do that.
So
if any trustees want to dig into this any deeper before our Monday meeting, please feel free to reach out to Tim, Melinda, or I, and we'll have these slides or a format of them in Monday's meeting, and then we'll also continue the discussion on the 23rd and at our October budget workshop. So we have some time to work through this.
Okay, so I believe that's all for the Finance Committee.
Yes, everything else is on the consent agenda.
Administration Committee, Trustee Dodd.
All items on consent?
Municipal Services Committee, Trustee Sullivan.
All items approved on consent.
Public Safety Committee, Trustee Kurzman.
All items approved on consent.
Judiciary Committee, Trustee Plunkett.
All items on consent.
There are no reports. I think this is on the agenda. There are no reports from our special committees. Item 7 is new business, and there's no new business to discuss. Item 8 is adjournment, so I would now entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? We stand adjourned at 9:45 p.m.